Hello, everybody. I see people are still joining, but we'll go ahead and get started with our panel session today. Welcome to you all. Today, we're going to discuss translating global prescriptions on policy development, monitoring, and assessment to local realities, and with particular, how can we broadly align policies globally but respect and take into account like the local needs for policy development and so. So within the panel today, I will moderate. My name is Tony Ross-Hellauer. I'm a senior researcher here in Graz in Austria, a meta-researcher studying open science. And I'm very pleased to say that we have a real expert panel today. We have with us Dr. Anna Persic, who is Program Specialist for Science and Technology and Innovation Policies and Open Science at the UNESCO headquarters in Paris, an ecologist by training with a PhD in ecotoxicology. Dr. Persic joined UNESCO in 2006 and coordinated the development of the UNESCO recommendation on open science, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with, and is currently working towards its implementation. And then I'm pleased to welcome Natalia Manola, the CEO of OpenAIRE, the European Open Scholarly Communication Infrastructure. Physicist and computer scientist by training, Natalia has been involved in the development of OpenAIRE from its start, which is many years now. She is deeply involved in the European open science endeavors. So OpenAIRE has a significant role in operating services to foster open science, but also in building human capacities to make it happen. And then next we have Dr. Ioana Gripari, who leads AI-driven initiatives for science policy and innovation at Athena Research Center, OpenAIRE, and OPEX. She is project coordinator for PathOS, a Horizon Europe project aiming to collect concrete evidence on the effects of open science. And I'm very proud to be part of Ioana's team in driving that project. Her background is in econometrics with degrees from Brown University and LSE and a PhD from University of Minnesota. And then we have Susan Riley from the Irish Research e-Library. Susan became director of IReL in 2022 and spent most of her career working in and with research libraries on emerging issues and services such as open research. She chairs the LIBRA Copyright Working Group, is a member of the IFLA Open Science Steering Committee, and is on the Policy Committee of Knowledge Rights 21. So welcome to all our panelists. Just short housekeeping before we start. If everybody could ensure that they keep their mics muted if you're not speaking. And the panel today will start with short impulse presentations from each of our panelists, but then we'll open up for discussion. I have some discussion questions prepared, of course, but we'd really prefer if the discussion came from the audience. So please feel free at any time to put your questions in the chat as they occur to you. We won't answer questions after each of the short impulse talks. We'll save that for the end of the discussion, but you can, as questions occur to you, please put them in the chat and we can address them later. Okay, so with that, the first to give a short talk will be Dr. Anna Persic from UNESCO. Please, Anna, if you could share your slides and take it away.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Tony, and thank you again for the invitation to present in this session and to address these important issues of kind of how do we translate the principles at the global level into national and more local levels as well. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who is connected. Let me just share my screen very quickly. And fine, let me see. Just a second. Sorry, there's just a little problem here. I'll try to fix it very quickly. Apologies, there it is. Here we go. I hope everybody can see the slides properly now. So I would like to start by thinking about, why do we need open science and what are the different benefits of open science? Because when we talk about policies, what we actually really want is that those benefits are delivered and that they are delivered to the audiences to which we want to deliver them for. So when we look at open science, there really are different benefits at different levels, going from individual level to institutional, national, regional, and global. So we are talking about better collaboration, better visibility, credit, better purpose when we talk about individual level, innovation, networking, cost efficiency, reproducibilities. These can be the benefits at institutional, national level, transparency, impact, economic benefit, access to resources. These kind of go through the different levels. And then, of course, public engagement, trust, global goals, global benefits, human rights and equity. This is something that really benefits everybody at the global level. So when we think about developing the policies and when we think about developing the principles and guidance for the policies, we really should also be thinking about the benefits that these policies should actually deliver in terms of their impact in the end. So we've seen this graph in different shapes during yesterday's presentations, but it is really about what do we need to transition to open science. We know it is a cultural shift. It is a shift in the system, which requires work on several issues and in several domains. We have to work on infrastructures, capacities, incentives, policies, funding, and monitoring. And in a way, we have to work on all of this together. But the policy part is the one that kind of brings all of these different elements together and makes sure that all of these elements are equally contributing to the impact to which we want the policy to look into. So why an open science policy? Indeed, to show commitment, to build stability, to enhance the clarity. The role of the policies really is to make everybody understand and make everybody be on the same page regarding the objectives, the visions, the missions, regarding the definitions that we are using in the different policies. The importance of open science policy also is to engage the different stakeholders, which are absolutely necessary to develop the policy and also to implement the policy. So we often say that policies are kind of a top-down approach, which is true, but another point is also that you can use the process of policy development to actually engage different communities, which will then be involved in the implementation process. And therefore, in a way, rather than it being top-down, it can be seen also as a bottom-up approach. So you use the policy process and the policy development process to build this understanding, to build these clarities, the stabilities, and also to show commitment from these different communities that will be engaged in the implementation of the policy. And also a policy should be put in place to identify and possibly remove some possible barriers that one can encounter in putting in place open science practices. So the reason why we have an international policy framework is because there was a need for a common vision, for a common of what open science is and what it contributes to, of a common definition. What is open science? Are we talking about open access to publications? Are we talking about open data, infrastructures, engagement? How do these different elements come together? So again, there was a need to pull these things together. There was a need to look into values and principles that actually are guiding all of the different actions, and also to have some kind of an idea of what actions need to be taken as priority to put open science according to these values and principles and in its definition in place. So this is where, in terms of the work of UNESCO and the UNESCO recommendation on open science, the idea really is that we build together through this consultative process that actually took place over 2 years period, to build this consultative process and build this policy framework that would be agreeable for everybody, and that people could then, different countries, different disciplines could then be using to adapt to their own purposes and to their own realities. So again, the policy framework as the one that is in the UNESCO recommendation on open science is not too prescriptive, and there is a lot of room for flexibility and absolute need for adaptability, which is absolutely recommended in the recommendation. There is no one size fits all, there is not one model fits all, hence the importance of this international framework to guide us towards a certain common vision. But then, of course, these principles, these values have to be translated into specific contexts through different types of policies at the regional, national, institutional, or community level. So how do we translate these global values and principles in national or institutional policies? It's never an easy task because there are so many, there's such a diversity of different contexts in which we have to develop these different policies. But what we have tried to do, thanks to the inputs from the UNESCO's working group on open science policies, which brings together, again, people from different countries, from different backgrounds, is, again, even to develop the policies for open science, to come up with some factors that can guide those who are developing the policies to align with the international recommendations, but again, be able to adapt it to their own needs. So some of these, and I will put the link to the policy brief in the chat later on. But some of these key factors that we have identified is the need to mainstream open science across the different sectors, not only looking at science per se, but also in some other possible sectors, such as education and educational policies, such as trade and other types of policies, which are kind of related also to science, technology, innovation, and therefore benefit from the principles of open science as they are defined in the international framework. The need to align with existing policies, again, existing at the national or institutional level, the need for clarity, for comprehensiveness, the need to really think about open science beyond open access, because this the way that the different elements of open science come together is extremely important to the potential of open science in terms of delivering what we would like open science to deliver. So focusing just on one element of open science probably will not unleash the whole potential of open science. Commitment to resourcing, it is something that needs to be addressed in these types of national and more local policies. Equity and inclusion, alignment of incentives, and here it can be quite explicit, the policies can be quite explicit in terms of what this alignment of incentives means, but then also leaving the space for learning, adaptation, flexibility in the way the policy can be implemented or interpreted. An important part of open science policies at the national level, at the local level, is the need to have a monitoring and evaluation mechanism, and to be able to regularly look into what impacts we have with those policies, and are they still in line with the values and principles according to the international framework. So this is my last slide, just about some other key elements to consider in developing such policies, again, from our work with the working group. I think what is really, really important is to have a rationale very clearly defined. And again, this is where the policy development process is important, and this forward-looking vision. It's important to have this rationale and vision that really corresponds to the actors that are benefiting from this policy and that are actually going to be the actors of implementation. There is need in a policy to really have guidance to ensure the different parts of open science are adequately addressed, that the roles, rights, and responsibilities are also clearly identified, and that we have identified sources for resources and an implementation plan. So I think I'm going to leave it at that, but I think my key message here is that one would need to have a look at the international framework for kind of a long-term vision, and also for some guiding values and principles. But then definitely it is in the way that those values and principles are adapted to national and local context that is going to be the driving force kind of for the development of policies at local or national levels. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to respond to questions later on.
Many thanks, Hannah. Fantastic. Especially like talking about the role of policies, not as just as top down, but also in engagement and awareness building. Next up is Natalia Manola of OpenAIRE. We'll talk about open science policy monitoring as a community effort. Please, Natalia.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you for this forum, and it's a pleasure to talk to people around the world. So I think, Anna, I will just catch up on what you said. A few things is that there is not one size that fits all in policy, that we need to understand that there is diversity, and we need to understand that there are different ways of doing things. And I will just focus a bit on how we are seeing things in Europe. And I think Europe has had a long history, already since 2007, implementing open science, open access, and then open science policy. So when we are doing these kinds of policies, what we need to understand is that there are different flavors on policies. So if you look at the graph on the side, this is the latest graph from Europe, how countries are touching upon publication, data, software, services, infrastructure, skills on assessment that includes open science and engagement with the public, for example, all of these aspects that are part of open science. Then we need to think about what member states and institutions think about strategies versus policies, and how these policies can be mandatory or not. Those are all of things that do take a difference, that do make a difference, and especially how they are translating into implementation plans. So what it is that the first thing is to see if there is a strategy from the organization or the country, how this can be turned into policy, how it can be made mandatory or not, and what aspects of it, because it doesn't have to be all at once. And then what are the roadmaps and the actionable roadmaps that we need to make it happen. And what we think is, and what we have found is that monitoring is key into shaping these effective or efficient policies. I have some things here, two maps of Europe. The first one is open access to publication, and then is open data policy on data management, and there is one on fair management, there is one on skills. And what we will see is that member states in Europe, they are adopting different aspects of the policies as they go along, as they're building infrastructure, and as they're bringing this change gradually. Now, what is the goal of monitoring? So the monitoring, first of all, is not something that we need to penalize. We do not monitor. I think what we are doing now, we call it more of observations and observatories, because what we want to do is to create an environment where we can learn from each other, whether we are institutions in a state, in a country, or in Europe. And then the idea is here towards effective policy, because not everything is effective. So when we talk about monitoring, it's not about numbers. Numbers do make a difference, but it's not about numbers. It's about the processes, and it's about what works and what not, because we are in a fluid situation, that things are changing. So we need to make sure that we find these points of intervention that make the difference. And because the circumstances or the context is not the same all over the world, I think we need to find what are the key enablers in every situation. And at the end of the day, it's about aligning, because if we have too many different policies around, I would say around Europe, but then I would say Europe to US, to Canada, to Australia, to China, then we will find ourselves in a situation that this, not aligning will have some impact which may not be positive. And I think this is why the UNESCO Open Science Framework is so important, and everyone really loves it. Now, the other thing is that the goal is how to do this aligning and monitoring. I will just state an example of how we have done it in OpenAIRE. We have these national open access desks, which is a network of experts in each country. And this has proven to be very valuable because at the end of the day, it's about people. So people learn from each other. People are getting skills, that by doing and by learning and by seeing what has worked in other situations. So how we are doing, how we are building the policies also has to do not just with infrastructure, but also by building the human capacities at the right places. Then the other thing that I would like to have the message is that we need the tools to make it happen. We need to, first of all, when we have new organizations that are new into the open science policy, we need to align policies while we're in the making. So, and then it's policies for organizations at the research performing organization or the funding organization. And I think what Anna showed with this toolkit is that there are quite a few toolkits out there. So, for example, I have put a link here in OpenAIRE where we have the checklist and model policies. And linking to the point that I will make in the end, we made this 2 years ago, and because of the changes, especially in AI and regulations, legal regulations in Europe, we already need to see that we need to update them. So this is something that we need to work on. Then also, it's not just tools to help us shape the policies, but it's tools to understand what's going on, tools to understand, to see what works and what not. And as an example, I will give the European Open Science Observatory, which is we're building in the context of the European Open Science Cloud. And we are gathering information all about everything about open science in Europe. So we have indicators to show readiness. How is a country at a country level? How ready is the country to do this? How to uptake, and what is the actual impact? We have a standing questionnaire where country representatives report on the progress. We have country fishes, and what is important here is that the country is not just about the numbers, but it's also about the narratives on who is involved, how they're involved, what has worked, and also the stories to showcase the best practices. So it's more of a learning environment. And then the last message that I want to say is that monitor is in a continuous effort. Policies, what we need to understand, and I think Anna showed that very well, is policies are multifaceted, and then they are evolving. As I said, is more components of open science entering the picture, for example, reproducibility, ethics, biases, for example. And then what we need is we need to have a consensus or a convergence, maybe not a consensus, on indicators, or to have a framework. Evidence-based indicators is key. So I think, this is what PathOS and hopefully Joanna will talk about. Indicators are not there to rank, but rather to see how we can improve, a self-assessment and improve. And then also what we need to understand is that the monitoring should come from open sources. We're talking about open science, so monitoring with open sources is a must, and this is where the community must invest and work towards. And I think this is what I wanted to say, Tony.
This is great, Natalia. Thanks for demonstrating all these initiatives, also the OpenAIRE are involved in. Moving on to Ioana.
Yes, thank you, Tony. Yes, you can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about the next natural step after policy making and monitoring, which is the evaluation of actual open science policies. And I'm going to discuss them through the context of the PathOS project, which is basically just about that. Okay, so let's see. Right. So as Natalia and Anna also said, so we need effective, efficient, and incentive-compatible strategies and policies, and we need to be able to foster adaptability as things change. So evaluation is extremely critical for that because it's we gain understanding, and it's the only way to move forward. Now, I would like to separate two different concepts, which, if I'm misusing the jargon at all, please excuse me. But we have the impact of open science as a general, broad impact assessment. And then we have the effect of openness on impact, which is something more talking about isolating the effect of openness specifically. So the one on the left, we're talking about contribution of open science, so correlations. It's a more holistic approach, is easier to establish, and one can quite quickly observe general trends and patterns. Of course, this doesn't explain why something is going on and what is the causal effect. And this would be what we're aiming for, which is the thing on the right, isolating the effect of open or particular open science policies on the impact of science in general. And this refers to attribution to open science, so causality. It gives a level of granularity. It's much more complicated to establish, but it leads to targeted policy making. Now, we think as PathOS that both of these are extremely important. So whenever causality, whenever we are able to capture causality, that's what we should aim for because it's real understanding. However, having a broad understanding of impact with its correlates and its enablers and confounding factors and so on, so without rigorously necessarily being able to establish causality always, it's still relevant and we should still keep track of that as well. So I will discuss very briefly about PathOS. So it's a Horizon Europe project that is finishing in August 2025, and these are the partners that are involved. And the main goal is to identify and quantify the key impact pathways of open science across different sectors of our society in order to help. So policy evaluation. We try to go beyond state of the art by mapping the causal pathways whenever possible, and use a data-driven and AI-assisted approach to the other more traditional methods in order to come up with open science impact indicators and their estimates. In addition, we focus on developing a cost-benefit analysis framework that puts an actual, dollar value and net value at the end of open science practices. Now, this is broken down to 5 different sub-objectives, all of which relate to policy evaluation and have different intricacies. So the first objective, so how do you break this down? You start by modeling the open science intervention logic and key impact pathways. You try to identify causal pathways and rely, of course, on literature, collected stories, and data in order to build this framework. Then you move on to quantifying this objective. So provide indicators that help you, that if estimated, they can provide this evaluation. And of course, they have to be combined in different ways in order to establish causality. But you have a framework of indicators. And by indicator, I mean a series, each indicator is composed of metrics, and each metric is composed of methodology, dataset, and so on. It's the entire indicator recipe. And then we have the operationalization of these methods. So we test them in particular case studies and see how well they work and across different settings. And then we go for the dollar value stuff, so the cost benefit analysis framework, to provide a different kind of aspect of open science. And then throughout all this, we have to make sure that we engage everyone. And as Natalia said as well, it's important to have some sort of convergence in what we're doing. So, and I have at the top right here the website of the project, because, for example, the handbook of indicators is already out at its first version, and people can go and edit it via GitHub. It's curated, of course, and add comments and so on. So please take a look so that we work on this convergence. So we have 6 different case studies that we hope capture different dynamics that we can then say something more general about open science policy evaluation. So we have 3 thematic case studies, which is the bioinformatics one, COVID-19 one, and the one on emerging topics. The last one looks at emerging topics fostered by open science, in particular gender in AI and climate innovations. And then we have 3 country-specific case studies that look at different infrastructures in 3 countries, the Netherlands, France, and Portugal, to see different aspects, different effects from particular open science resources. Now, how are all of these separate things, what do they have to say about policy evaluation, and what will we be able to say at the end? Well, in terms of the impact pathways, they're essential for understanding how policies translate into practice and the downstream effects. So that when a new policy comes up, it is possible to examine if it is incentive compatible, if it's going to reach the expected person it's supposed to reach. Here, of course, the complication is that tracing complex and interconnected pathways that have a lot of feedback loops and influence diverse outcomes, it's not straightforward. However, once aware of the dynamics at play, one can make a good argument for capturing at least the effects of the intended and unintended effects, let's say. Then we have the open science impact indicators, which are various measures needed to measure the actual policy adherence, efficacy, and efficiency. And yeah, crafting these indicators, including description of robust methodologies, is quite tricky as well. We find here that the literature includes a few indicators that have been used throughout, and they're very mature, let's say. However, there are certain aspects of effects that we expect, like the ones that Anna showed at the beginning, that really do not have indicators that are well developed. So we must work towards that. Then the cost-benefit analysis framework informs the allocation of resources and policy prioritization. And of course, this is more clear always at a more local level because the effects compound too much after some points. And here, balancing quantifiable costs with benefits that are oftentimes qualitative, like, it's more participatory, or I don't know. Some things can be measured, some things still, but it's a bit trickier. This is a bit tricky, but it's good to have a framework and start working on this because we need to, eventually someone is going to weigh them. It is also tricky to agree these qualitative benefits, what are the actual measures, given the priorities of different players.
Ioana?
And then
I'm almost done. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And then we have the operationalization of the case studies, which is the way that we use in order to test policies in the real world and assess practical impact. So the idea is to adapt the evaluation tools to different disciplinary and contextual nuances. And there are some other more complicated things that are open questions. But what we would like to understand at the end of the project and in general as we progress is how can we scale our understanding of causality and impact to inform global open science policies? How easy is it to go from local to global? Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And sorry for butting in at the end there.
Okay.
We'll need to keep, yeah. So moving along, next we have Susan Riley from the Irish Research Library. Susan, please take it away.
Thanks, Tony. I have to apologize. I don't have a presentation. I felt that my role here today was more to share a story and allow you to draw your own conclusions to maybe inform local implementation of policy or UNESCO recommendations. I love the theme of this discussion because I think that for so many, the UNESCO recommendations can seem very far away from, I mean, for so many actors in the research ecosystem, these recommendations can seem very far away from their everyday work and environment, even though these recommendations have been developed, in a very inclusive fashion. And I also think that, monitoring, and I think Natalia alluded to this, is not always positively received or viewed. But I think the story of the development of the Irish Open Access Monitor shows that these high-level initiatives, the initiatives such as the UNESCO recommendations, can have real-world impact if we invest in following through by working with stakeholders to translate these kind of recommendations into local policy and initiatives, and that we can make monitoring work if we engage stakeholders in the development of our monitoring mechanisms. So the Irish National Open Access Monitor was formally launched last week, and I think there's a few people here today who know quite a lot more about the workings of the monitor than I do, because it was developed by OpenAIRE. The aim of the monitor is to promote transparency and enable progress in open access to be tracked at a national level, allow for identification of gaps and enable targeted interventions to ensure equity in how we achieve open access in Ireland is realised. And the monitor offers various views for research performing organisations, funder perspectives, allows international benchmarking, disciplinary insights, and it's got so many features that are really drawing on the open research ecosystem and infrastructure. But I'm not here to show you the monitor. You can follow the link there from Joanna if you're interested in taking a look at it. I'm here to talk about how we got to this point and the key to our success so far, and what I think will be the key to the success of the future of the monitor. The monitor is actually funded by something called the National Open Research Forum in Ireland, and this forum is explicitly focused on providing a space for communication, consultation and cooperation amongst stakeholders in the research system to work towards open research and the adoption of a culture of open research. The monitor itself and the idea for the monitor comes from a national action plan that was developed by stakeholders. And I think it's important to emphasize that this is a plan and not a policy. It's a plan that all stakeholders in the Irish research ecosystem, so universities, research funders, signed up to realise, and it sets out our goals and the steps we need to take to achieve those goals. And the process for the development of this plan was kickstarted in 2021 by the North, the National Open Research Forum, with a landscape analysis. And the North essentially brought stakeholders from across the landscape volunteers to work in working groups to analyze the landscape, look at local policies and practices, but also look at international and European policies and best practices to understand where we were in Ireland and where we wanted to be. And this was around the same time as the UNESCO recommendations were being developed, and they very much informed this work. After that, I chaired the Open Access Working Group in Ireland, by the way. But after that, we also looked at areas, we made recommendations on areas that needed to be further investigated. And again, working groups with various stakeholder representatives were set up. There was a long process of consultation, workshops, surveys, until eventually the National Open Research Action Plan was launched in November 2022. And one of the targets in this action plan is to achieve a sustainable and inclusive path to open access by 2030. And in developing this plan, we recognized that in order, of course, we'd set we knew where we wanted to be by 2030, but how to get there needed to be informed by data. We needed to constantly understand the open access landscape in Ireland. And that's why the first priority in the plan was to develop an open access monitor. IReL stepped forward to manage the development of the monitor because we're a national e-resource licensing consortium. We also run the ORCID consortium and the DataCite consortium. So we understand the importance of transparency in monitoring of scholarly communications. And we also understand the infrastructural needs behind it. Throughout the process of the development of this monitor, consensus and consultation has been key. So before we even went out to tender, we surveyed stakeholders to achieve consensus on what we were measuring and how. So something as basic as getting all stakeholders to agree that the BOAI definition was the definition of open access that we were going to use, that in the first instance we were going to monitor peer-reviewed articles and conference proceedings, that in order to qualify as open access, these articles and conference proceedings must have licenses. That was agreed with our stakeholders. We validated and collected user stories, so people had input into how the monitor would be used and how they would use it and how their data would be displayed, all before we went out to tender. And we have been very committed to transparency and openness throughout the process of developing the monitor. We have an advisory committee for the monitor who've guided us and OpenAIRE in the development of the monitor all along the way. The minutes from those meetings, all of our project documentation is available on Zenodo for people to view. So there's nothing about this monitor that is not transparent. I think, and the other thing to say is this monitor is based on open data, which has been very important for us. Now, you might think that this is a story of international recommendations having local impact, but I think this is a two-way street. We're very excited to work with OpenAIRE on the development of the monitor based on open data. The openness and transparency of what we do or have done means that the monitor can, what we have done can be used by others in other settings. Along the way, we have identified improvements that our local stakeholders can make to their data to make their data fair, recommendations on how they can improve their adoption and use of persistent identifiers. And in taking those actions, our local stakeholders are not only improving the monitor, they're actually improving the whole data ecosystem. And so I think it's a nice example of how local action also translates into potentially global impact. And I guess the future of the monitor is very much based on continuing to engage with stakeholders and continuing to refine throughout the years.
Fantastic. Thank you, Susan. A really great case of kind of translating to local needs and really involving local communities in the development of a monitoring practice. We are running a bit behind time, and this is mainly my fault as moderator. I apologize, which means we don't have so much time for questions. So I have a few questions, but I would like to prioritize those from our audience. So if you have a question, please either raise your hand or unmute and just ask. Okay, in the absence of any questions from the audience, I want to ask our panelists, how well do you think that local realities really are being served by national, international policies? Thinking about all the different contexts of research, whether it's different disciplines, different regions, different types of institutions, how well do you think that current policies, do you see any room for improvement in the case of the policies that we currently have? Anybody? Natalia?
I can answer that. I think they are serving very well because it's true that at the local level, whether it's a university or a funder or a research community, they know that the high level policies, they can take them and adapt them to their own needs. So the idea here is how to build these communities and empower them to do that. And again, these very local communities, they move into the context of a country, of a national funder or national funders, and in their domain. So I think it works well. That's my and I think what Susan presented is what she presented is all the community coming together in North, and then once you build the basic policies and the plans or the plan, then you can get this and adapt it into your own institution.
Mm-hmm. Anna?
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think what I really liked from Susan's presentation is that these international principles and policies do not necessarily have to result in another policy at the local level. It can be a policy, what we call a policy instrument, right? Like an action plan or a roadmap or something like that. And we've seen actually with when it comes to open science, in particular in the South, there is a lot of countries who are opting for their roadmaps at the national levels and then action plans more at the institutional or community level. So it's also important, again, as I said, these international national frameworks, they really provide you with the space within which you can move and adapt, and then you can also use the different instruments to be able to kind of implement those visions into something concrete at the local level. And I completely agree with Susan that what happens at the local level then informs the international level completely. And that's why for the UNESCO recommendation, we also have a system of monitoring. So every 4 years, countries come back with their monitoring reports, and that is also then used to eventually either revise the recommendation or revise the different tools and resources that we are providing to countries and different actors. So great to see the example that Susan presented, and I really hope that it will also feature in the report of Ireland to back to UNESCO on the implementation of the recommendation.
Great, thank you, Susan.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, there has to be space for pragmatism. So when we developed the action plan, it was entirely stakeholder driven. We didn't know if there was going to be funding put forward to enable the development of the action plan. So it absolutely could not be a policy. So I think, funders have policies, but stakeholders have plans, and the two are absolutely interlinked. But you have to be realistic and pragmatic when you're if you really want to, drive things forward. Policy is not enough, and sometimes it's just not appropriate.
Thank you. Okay, I see that we're coming up on the edge of our time. Are there any other questions from the audience? Okay. I'm not entirely sure how strict the organizers' rule is on finishing on time. Maybe just a quick last question. Bearing in mind Joanna's talk and thinking about Anna's input about kind of what we were originally aiming at with open science. We're not just aiming for more open access papers, we're aiming for more open access papers in order to have greater diversity of readership and efficiencies and so on. To what extent do you think the current monitoring schemes are geared towards monitoring uptake rather than impact? And how do you think that might develop?
I think, can I say?
Yes.
I think in terms of a particular societal and economic impact, as you know also very well, the evidence is lacking besides one aspect of societal impact only. And also there are no indicators that are widely used. So I think, and this makes sense, first we established monitoring uptake of the policies, and then we move on to the impact, which is much more complicated, especially when it becomes more long-term and first this and then that and then that. So I think we have to work a lot on this still.
Thank you. Natalia?
Yeah, I think one of the other things that we're not measuring a lot is the uptake of open science practices by the stakeholders. So we are measuring outcomes like publications, data, software, and all of these things, infrastructure. But then we're not, what we should also be measuring is the practices, because if we somehow measure these practices, okay, for example, do I involve citizen science, citizens in my, or the public in my research? Do I make an effort to have, to teach open science, or to make sure that in my lab I do open science? So I think this is also something that is lacking in our measurements, because if we somehow measure that, that may translate, or, to a cultural change that we are all talking about, which may take years, to transform how science is being done. So it's not just uptake of the open science. That's also something that is missing, I think.
Thank you. Okay, I think with that then we will close the session. Thank all our panelists for great input and for discussion, and thank all attendees for coming. So thanks everybody.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.